time, but I do want to jump into something that lots of our listeners and our members are concerned about, and that is restaurants, tents, and heaters, and that kind of thing in downtown. And we're hearing from some members that say Lafayette's different than Walnut Creek, is different than Concord. And if you could just tell us who has overall responsibility and who do you team with when it comes to looking at the safety at restaurants and how that all works.
Sure. So, regardless of what city your restaurant happens to be in, there's basically three parties that are involved in the enforcement or planning, if you will, for the use of tents or outdoor dining. Number one, you have the health department, and they could be looking at things for two reasons. Without COVID, they would be looking at your typical restaurant cleanliness and health issues. With COVID, they're looking at the design of your outdoor dining arrangement from a pandemic point of view. On top of that, you have the city, which looks at things from a variety of viewpoints, not the least of which would be aesthetics, as well as safety, public safety. And then for us, we have jurisdiction over the tents and the activities within them, as well as, again, public safety, making sure that we can access areas of the street and making sure that the activities within the tent are appropriate based on state standards or state codes. Our view of tents is one that, number one, we want to make it work. And there's always ways to make it work. It's just that we have to make it work within the risks that are associated. So we've worked with every city to try and be as common sense as possible from at least the fire district's perspective, which is what we can control. And the first things first, we have to be able to get there, not necessarily to that tent, but to that building and the building beyond that and the building beyond that. So when the cities came to us and asked about closing roads down, we said, well, we can close roads, but we need to keep at least one lane available to us. Doesn't mean that it's available to the general public to use, but one lane basically from the center line to where the parking would start, that 12-foot wide lane, we would need to be able to access that lane at all times to be able to move whatever mobile barrier was there and be able to drive through onto that lane so that we could get to the fire or whatever the emergency was. So that's kind of first and foremost about why in some cases the entire road cannot be shut down or the entire street cannot be shut down. When it comes to the tents themselves, the tents have requirements with regards to being secured. We've seen, very large, almost 2 foot, well, probably more like 2.5 by 2.5 by 2.5 foot concrete blocks that secure the tent so it doesn't blow away. The biggest issue and conflict that we've been dealing with is with the health department, at least the way I see it, during the purple tier and the use of tents exclusively for what they consider to be outdoor dining. And in their mind, outdoor dining meant that you had to have at least two, I think it was two opposite sides of your tent open for airflow. And that was really the pandemic issue. It really wasn't anything more than that. So now that we're moving into different tiers, less restrictive tiers, I could see that tents would start to be used as indoor dining spaces. And obviously there's a spacing issue and how many people you can put in there. One of the biggest challenges that we have with tents right now is the reality of the weather and the need to heat the tents. I love going out to dinner. That's one of the things that I miss about COVID. I've been in many dining arrangements, not necessarily in Contra Costa County, but in other counties where tents are used. And some of them I think are very safe and very well done. And some of them, the restaurant operators are putting tabletop heaters on hay bales. And so that's an example of something that probably isn't very safe. So the heaters, some of us probably have them on our back patios. They are designed, listed, and tested for outdoor use only. They're not designed to be put inside anything. So given the fact that we need to try and make this work, we have come up with some standards with each city, and these standards are consistent from us across each city. that we will allow the use of these outdoor heaters in tents. However, the tents have to have at least two sides open. The two sides open need to be there to allow people to get out of the tent in the case that there is a fire. But the other part is that these are propane heaters, and if they malfunction, there's a buildup of gas. It smells, it's noxious fumes, and it poses a risk. And so we have to make sure that there's adequate ventilation for these heaters being used in a pseudo indoor environment that they weren't meant to be used in. So our request is that we have two sides open of a typical four-side tent, just to allow airflow so that we don't have a buildup of gases. I can tell you from some of my experiences eating in outdoor tents, there are often malfunctions, if you will, with the heater. The staff may not really be expert at operating the heaters. The heaters, when they start to get low on gas, the flame goes out, but the gas is still coming out. And so you can smell it, so you know the hazard's there. So really what we ask is that there be adequate separation of 3 feet on all sides, that it be placed on the ground, that it be placed on a surface specific to the manufacturer's recommendation. So if it's a tabletop heater, it could be on the table, but if it's not a tabletop heater, it shouldn't be on the table or on a bale of hay. So each city has other standards that I can't necessarily speak to that are promulgated by the city. And I do know that to some extent they are different even within our fire district. But from the fire district's perspective, we have worked very hard not just to be consistent within our district, but also to grab the fire marshals from Moraga, Orinda, and San Ramon, come together and say, let's be consistent so that regardless of wherever these patrons might be, that from a fire perspective, we're as consistent as possible and the requirements aren't different from agency to agency.
I see. So Walnut Creek has a number of streets that are blocked off, but and it's wonderful. We're actually, a lot of people are thinking that the future is going to be like that we're not going to give up a lot of the street. But I can see, so in those streets that are blocked off, that they do require access then for fire equipment, at least on one side, or in some cases we have just a very short part of the entire street is blocked off. Like on Main Street, I'm thinking you can, down by Mel's, that little street is blocked off entirely, but a rig could pull right up to it and access any building, correct?
That's the trick, is it has to do with distance. And so Main Street itself would likely not be able to be blocked off in both directions, but one of the side streets that connects Main to Broadway, as an example, or some other side street, if that side street is so short, we may be able to allow that to be shut.
I see. Somebody asked me, and the coverage issue, that if, for example, if there is, as you say, 4 engines, a truck, and a couple of chief officers, there's a fire in Rossmore with an elderly population. But let's assume that it's just that initial response. How does that impact downtown Walnut Creek? So, for example, which engines go, and then what if there is a significant fire in downtown Walnut Creek at the same time? How does Fire, what exactly happens in terms of resources?
So let's use the example of Rossmore. So if there's a fire in Rossmore, you probably all know there's a fire station right at the entrance of Rossmore. So that would be the first engine to go into Rossmore. And the way that our computer-aided dispatch system, the CAD, works, all of our vehicles have GPS. So we can see them on the computer screen. I can see where every vehicle is at any moment in time. The computer will grab the closest chief officer, the closest fire engine, the closest ladder truck. Even if it's an Antioch engine that happens to be in downtown Walnut Creek for some reason, it will grab that and it will send it to the fire. So presuming that everybody's in quarters and nobody's on an incident, it will grab the 5 closest resources and send them. What happens within minutes is that once it's determined that this incident is what we call a working incident, meaning it's going to be a fairly lengthy ordeal. It's not just a pot on the stove. The computer starts working on recommended move-ups, and it will start telling us where it thinks, based on call history and so forth over the last 10 years, where we should be filling holes. And so the process of backfilling Walnut Creek starts within minutes of that dispatch. So you'll have Concord units start moving into Walnut Creek, Pleasant Hill, Martinez. And then if there's additional coverage that's needed in Concord or Martinez, then it will recommend units from Bay Point or Pittsburgh start moving into those areas to cover. So that process starts. If there is a second incident, which does happen from time to time, usually it ends up just by Murphy's Law, it's usually somewhere else. But let's say there was another incident in downtown Walnut Creek. Again, the computer goes and searches for the closest. And if those units have already started towards downtown Walnut Creek to cover Fire Station 1 as an example, they will then be put into a response mode and they will respond to that incident. And then that whole process of covering will start again. And we'll cover whatever area is needed. It's not unheard of in very large incidents, 2 and 3 alarms where we have 15, 16, 20 engines at a fire, a 3-story building or something that's fully alight, that we will have Richmond units, San Ramon units, Antioch units in downtown Walnut Creek covering downtown Walnut Creek.